So me and Trevor, we've been working on this project, or cultural planning, already since 2017. And as I mentioned also, we've been looking at these neighborhoods. So that's the background. And I'm just going to go right into the baseline of what is cultural planning. We always feel like this is a good beginning for every event we have to remind ourselves what kind of lexicon we're using and what are we talking about. So in the beginning, we always also like to set the sense of urgency, as we believe that we have lost a sense of the city and sense of the citizenship. And there is a growing tension as our decision-making and bureaucratic structures are too technocratic for the fast-changing world. We can clearly see the tension between the Occupy pop-up movements, DIY urbanism, and social activism, who are actually shaping our cities the way we love them. They're making them lively, and there is this tension between then the regular planning, which is sometimes creating iconic architecture, privatization of the public. There's a strong trend of globalization and thematization. And this can be maybe illustrated by a happening or an event in Latvia during the 2014 Cultural Capital of Europe, where local cultural actors and artist collectives realized that maybe there is too much importance and resources also put into this large cultural framework of institutions, and they printed these Occupy Me stickers to show how much unused potential there is and how much of this also smaller grassroots culture there is, which is super rich in Latvia. And this became actually a strong movement and now has also grown into other big projects. And so actually cultural planning attempts to look at the city as a whole, to include all these yellow stickers and these even people, private people or private organizations. And this is maybe a way a cultural planning is trying to use. Culture planning is a tool that can be used to represent these subcultures in policy documents. And we see that culture and human-centered approach reveals that culture is actually closely linked to healthcare, economy, and politics. So in a way, cultural planning is trying to say that we're in the center of it all, but that we're at least very integrated part of the whole network. And we strongly also manifest that culture is not only the network of large cultural institutions, but actually the broader sense of the word. So culture is how we use the public space or greet or don't greet our neighbors, how we take care of our neighborhoods, how we take care of each other, how we respond to injustices, etc. And of course, we can also say that community is a culture. There's culture of community, and we definitely should say that community equals resilience. As we have seen, maybe an example would be Chicago 1995, where after a heat wave, it was very evident that some of the neighborhoods were doing much better in terms of elderly passing because they were affected the most. And it's very, very evident that the ones doing better are the ones with social infrastructure. There was nothing different. There was not more safety or greenery or cafes. It's just the social infrastructure, the culture of community, people meeting in public space, people knowing each other, or having these little rituals that they do together, such as playing chess in a park, for example. And also you would argue that culture is politically neutral ground, a way to discuss and learn and heal. And if it's also great, you could say, like, why is it that the culture is so difficult to embed in normal practice of city planning? And this is, again, like really very prevalent now in this pandemic, as there's no support system in a way saying that maybe art or culture isn't essential. And in many cases, this might be viewed as this cherry on top, something that you put when a plan is ready and the master plan is done, and it's kind of this layer on top that just kind of extra something. But we would argue that it's actually the start of it, like it should be the baseline. And in the worst case scenario, actually culture could be being used as a gentrifier. So our ideal model, or the way of thinking we would propose, is that artistic drivers are a vital part of how the city communicates with citizens, and vice versa. As we can see that artistic drivers are strong magnets, and we will see that in our other examples, also from Riga, showing that sometimes just a festival or a happening or a gallery can create a narrative around themselves, which really then creates another sense of citizenship amongst the people. And it's much easier to communicate with people on this level than it is, let's say, when you're working in a more structured system. So if we divide like traditional planning and cultural planning in this matrix, which is of course maybe a little bit exaggerated, but just to understand that we're trying to say that culture planning is more human and culturally led, and interventionist and participatory approach. And in this case, a lot of small actions are falling under this, where they weren't being kind of marked anywhere else. All these urban gaming, Occupy movements, participatory art, maker spaces, where do they fall in traditional planning? And we would say that actually we try to advocate for these soft processes of the city, and we're trying to create planning new normal. And we were trying to say that these are actually key to the planning processes. And culture planning is also creation of experimentation zones, and this is not only in public space but also in public sector, trying to advocate that there should be and can be a shift from no because to yes if culture. We have seen that this kind of shift really helps to foster a new generation of citizens who are really involved actually in decision making, and also artists who are much more involved. Yes, so we already stated that culture planning is an alternative to traditional planning theory. This has been mainstreamed in many places in the world, and it's a reaction to overly planned and rigid planning. So there's also the idea that culture planning could be supporting a permanent revitalization process of the city. So always being in a state of finding new and planning for new, and always looking and recalibrating, rather than turning city into this permanent dream of completion where everything has been set in stone and there's no place for interpretation. And it's also, culture planning is trying to say that we are not creating a place for people to display art or gather for a concert. It's about involving local people. It's about neighborhood approach, and the central question of it all: what drives communities? So culture planning is trying to say that it's not about what needs to happen. It's really about finding out what is already happening there, all the little things, all the small relationships and happenings in the community. It's not about theming, saying we're going to be a medical city or we're going to be a creative city, whatever that means, but it's finding a local DNA, what really is the unique kind of collaboration that is happening. And Charles Landry has been saying this beautiful statement that I really love, that we should create spaces for encounter and empathy, spaces where I wouldn't mind being with someone else. And we can see that there's architecture and planning and infrastructure that could create that feeling of respect and kind of movement. But can we do that also with non-infrastructural methods? And we argue that actually culture can do this, culture can create spaces of encounter and empathy. And this could be one example, for example, in Copenhagen, where a building block had been overtaken by an orchestra creating an individual work of art just from the sounds of the apartments, and created a concert just for that building residents. And this really creates a new happening, a new narrative of the place, which will never be the same as before. So we would argue that, yeah, this is creating an encounter of empathy. Of course, and this is also my last point, that culture planning is arts-led approach, and this is very important, that this is all about creating and stimulating imagination and new identities. To really go further, when someone asks you, what do you want in your neighborhood? How do you go further to just answering, I want a new bench, or please fix my playground? How do you actually vision new futures? Okay, so now can you, Trevor, I'm going to be skipping and you could pop in and talk further.
Yes, so I think now we're trying to look at some specifics which will just build on what Liva has said as to how cultural planning can be looked at as social innovation. They're in the review of social cohesion in the context of culturally led place rejuvenation. There's a report made by the European Commission which looked at about 70 culturally led projects, neighborhood projects, other projects in Italy, in France, in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Germany. And they highlighted the fact that actually culture is a driver of urban regeneration. We've known it for 10, 15, 20 years, but it was primarily the economic impact which we were focusing on. And this, of course, had some direct social benefits. But now you can see there's a whole turn in the focus of looking at culture in the urban context. And it is directing now to achieving social outcomes in terms of social cohesion. And we think that cultural planning should be looked at in this context. And it seems to be that cultural planning actually just does have the same parameters as social innovation. And what is social innovation actually? It's a broad kind of, can you just jump back? Yeah, back. Yeah, one more, forward, now forward, yeah. Yeah, so now you're forward, sorry. One more forward. That's it. Okay, so what is social innovation in an urban context? Really, it's about how to find new models to address social issues, new models, new methods, and new tools. And in this, I think that one of the key points has been how to redistribute the power structure, but also how to redistribute the sense of responsibility to find other kinds of models where city authorities, citizens, stakeholders, and the third sector could find new models actually to find out how we reignite the sense of citizenship and the sense of taking care of each other, of our cities. And both social innovation places humans, you might say the human perspective, at the heart of governance models. And this is very holistic, and this is precisely what cultural planning does and its methodology. Yeah, next one. So you might say the cultural planning delivers this kind of human-centered response, both to the definition of projects, to the mapping of neighborhoods, and then the mapping of where we are now, and also to the management structures we propose. In this report, it was highlighted that the factor of arts in these processes, arts and culture, gave 4 basic values to our communities, which are the prerequisite for any kind of social innovation. And these were the sense of belonging. Art projects, artists actually are able to increase that sense of belonging. through involving communities in the production, in co-creation of work. They are very inclusive. They can manage to actually override socially fragmented groups, age groups, ethnic groups, and so on. They have the possibility to be inclusive. They also represent, in the fact, depending on who you invite as the artist, as to be the driver, also promote and include very, very different cultural, subcultural lifestyles, ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. And they are actually very good at involving and participation processes. So, and they often put local residents at the center of the cultural life. So these four qualities have been highlighted by basically this analysis as being something which culture brings into the equation of community and neighborhood regeneration. There are also other factors which are really important, because in these processes there is actually a rebalancing, a sharing of power. In any project, there will be a new kind of agreement, new kind of partnership between the city administration, between citizens, between the drivers. Cultural processes are also very, very open and transparent, and one of the problems, one of the issues with the failure of the representative democracy as a system is that actually people are quite reticent, they're quite neutral, perhaps they actually have disengaged. And this generation of trust in the community, and also between the community and the city, is really important to sustain any kind of social innovation. Another thing which has been noticeable is that projects can be tailor-made to specific things, to specific situations, specific communities, and specific times. And that the working with arts and culture in communities also strengthens the links, because the art projects, usually artistic-driven projects, are usually very communicative in the way they also engage, not only by networks, but also by social media and so on. So there's a linkage involved. Yeah, I think it's very important, which to also build on what Liva was saying, that cultural planning activates and builds on what is there, and firstly looks at the material knowledge, skills, tradition, information channels, human resources of the community. So it's not so much about what is not there, but actually what is there. This positive point of departure, which is also really important to empower people and to motivate people to get involved. And this, starting with this process of cultural mapping, gives also a broad citizens-based starting point, which is not just about finding information for the project, but actually making citizens aware of where they are rooted, what they're part of, and what could be useful in the longer term. Yeah, in this, I think that this idea of sharing is quite clear, and cultural institutions and cultural activators are really very good at sharing. Actually, and this idea of sharing and not owning, and not wanting to have a profit motive, or not wanting it to be important. Am I muted? What's happening? Okay. Yeah. Why are cultural activators or drivers really obvious in this situation? Is because they are in very close contact with their communities. They have a direct interest to play a role in their community. They want to build stronger publics. They want to extend publics. They want to build local networks. They want to find content for their work, and this content can often be sourced locally, and they're of course interested in talent development. So these are all the motivations from the cultural actors' point of view. So they are natural partners in processes of change. Yeah, perhaps this is, we don't need to go into so much, but maybe maybe one thing is really interesting in this, the European Union review of the processes both in Gdansk and also in a Dutch city, Groningen, I think it was, of how they viewed cultural planning in this context. Interesting aspect that cultural planning is normally integrated, participatory, and projects are typically cross-sectoral and probably touch on many aspects, including heritage, environmental protection, urban regeneration, education, job creation, and so on and so on. And it's not that every project does this, but the variety is amazing. And actually working in this hybrid reality is really what we have to face up to, and really what we have to approach when talking about social innovation. It's no good siloing things and solving one issue and one problem. It has to be looked at by activating projects which cut across the board and involve things which are very, very obvious in specific situations. Yeah, I think this is also maybe the recommendations of URBAC 15 said, how do we actually support social innovation in cities? And their two conclusions were that cultural processing projects create common values and underpin future city governance, trust and participation, honesty, responsibility, individual institutional openness, and social cohesion. And secondly, experience from many social innovation projects point to the advantage of having a driver to support creative processes. Cultural structures and agencies have this ability. So these are some of the key things which I hope we're going to touch on in some of the projects we're looking at, and the discussions we're having over the next 2 days. Yeah, thank you.
The question is, if I only had one word or term to describe cultural planning, it would be, and as you can see that 25 people have already voted. I hope you see the...
Can you send the code again? And
there you go, you can see it. Yeah, there you go. Can you see the screen? Good. So please go to menti.com and please write the code in, and please keep the tab open for next questions during the day and also for tomorrow. And please write in the free form one word or one term. It can also be 2 words. What describes cultural planning from what you heard in the previous presentation, and also from what probably you know before and what you think it might describe or represent. And as we can see that gamification, participation are the top leading now, but they've been, as you can see, taken over by a lot of other. Maybe Trevor and Līva can comment already. So what do you see here?
Yeah, I think it's interesting with the community, of course, which perhaps a few years ago would not be on this list, but community is obviously a really key perspective. And we're defining communities in this time very, very differently. Communities are quite fluid. There are many communities. It's not just one. This is really interesting. And participation, yeah, obviously that's going to be good. But I'm really pleased that gamification is there, because it is about also visioning, it is about imagining, and it is about allowing to be able to play with reality.
Yeah, we see that participation and community are now taking leads with gamification, undefined creativity, and gentrification being also part of it.